Okay, so good afternoon for everybody listening, and good morning to some people, like our fellow speaker here in Europe, in Malta.
Good
So my name
afternoon.
is Hilton. I am the General Manager of Alba Wellness Valley. I am also the Ambassador for World Wellness Weekend Vietnam. And I'd like to invite everyone, or welcome everyone, should I say, to our wellness talk. And today we have a very interesting attendee or invitee or speaker. We have Dr. Hans, who we happened to come into contact via LinkedIn together, and I had an extremely interesting conversation with him. A man with enormous amounts of experience, will know what other words could I use about changing the world and making the world a better place in which we all living. And I think we all know that we are responsible individually, but I don't think we're making enough of an effort. And people like Mr. Hans are actively, Dr. Hans, sorry, are actively involved in many different projects around the world in climate change and what I like to call environmental wellness. So I think I've been talking for long enough. I would like to invite Dr. Hans to come in, and please let us know who you are, where you're from, and yeah, a little bit about yourself. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Hilton, for that fantastic introduction. A real pleasure to talking with you, a real pleasure to talk about wellness, about sustainability, and how it all links together with what I am doing and what I have been doing. I'm from the Netherlands originally, studied in England, and then had a career that basically was working in nature conservation and international development in Africa, in Asia, and here in Europe. I'm now based in Malta, the island of Malta in the Mediterranean. What is particularly interesting for you maybe is that for 5 years I was the first director of the International Union for Conservation in Vietnam. So we actually set up an office in Hanoi. This was 1994, and we worked with the then Environment Agency, which was part of the Ministry of Science and Technology. In those days, there was no ministry responsible for natural resources. And we sort of set up the thinking about environment, and we developed the first legislation and worked with provinces to train people to think about environmental issues. Not so much climate change in those days, that was not really that high on the agenda, but the general issue about conservation, about the interface of nature, economy, social issues, true sustainability. Of course, all that was part of the discussion. The last 5 years before I came to Malta, I was in China. And there I was the Director General of the International Bamboo and Rattan Organization. This is an intergovernment organization, a bit like the United Nations, as it were, with states as members. And Vietnam, again, was a member because there's a lot of bamboo in Vietnam. And we can talk about that as well. So an interesting career. At the moment, my main connection with what you're doing is that I'm working on what is called climate-friendly travel. And that is really promoting tourism that is low carbon, tourism that is linked to the SDGs, tourism that is trying to keep us within the global warming of 1.5%, because if we don't, we're going to have real problems in future.
Correct. Wow, so I wasn't lying. I know you've been involved in many things. It's interesting that back in the 90s, you were already involved here in Vietnam with discussions on sustainability and environmental wellness at the time, maybe not called that. I hope that the momentum is still there, but I'm under the impression that the momentum is not as much as it used to be. But interesting to see that. I have spoken to some people. There is definitely some type of following. But anyway, we're not here to talk about Vietnam. So maybe you can just give people a general idea on what your interpretation is. And again, a very difficult question to sum up in a few lines is, what is the climate crisis problem?
Well, the climate crisis is sadly enough something that we all have to deal with at the moment. Interesting enough, as you say, in the 90s, we were still talking about the future that might come upon us. I think the issue is at the moment, we all have to realize that we are in the middle of a crisis. You know, the forest fires in Australia, the flooding here, even in Europe, the disasters in the United States. I guess even the increases in typhoons in your part of the world, it all is linked to the fact that we've basically pumped in CO2 gases that have caused global warming, that has caused changes in the atmosphere. And the results of those changes are very difficult to predict, very difficult to foresee. I guess the best way to describe it is it's not so much a question of the heat, of the Earth as a whole getting hotter and hotter and hotter, although that is part of the problem. The biggest issue is that these changes in the climatic system cause more extreme periods of problem, extreme droughts, extreme flooding, but more frequent and more severe. So what in the past was maybe a 1 in a lifetime or 1 in 100 years event, now is becoming an event that once in 10 years or so. And where people in the past would say, well, flooding will only go up to 1 meter, and I know that I'm above the 1 meter mark, so I'm safe. Now the flooding might actually go up to 2 meters, and you will no longer be safe. So it's really a question of, on the one hand, trying to help companies, I mean, that's what we are doing, to build that resilience against the things that are happening. And on the other hand, trying to keep that change within some balance, as it were. We know that already we have too much CO2 in the atmosphere. And let's be honest, it's not just CO2. There are other greenhouse gases that are just as bad. But if we can reduce the output of those gases and at the same time absorb what is there through, on the one hand, natural means by planting lots of trees. On the other hand, maybe some interesting technological fixes to actually get the CO2 out of the air, maybe back in the ground, maybe made into some products. There are lots of different interesting opportunities. Then we can keep that CO2 down and therefore not get to an even worse situation than we are in at the moment.
I mean, 100%, and there are many things going on around the world, but I think one of the advantages of definitely yourself and all the organizations you work for, and me as a little player in the game here, but is that people have become a lot more aware. We're having this conversation today. And the word wellness is a very big word internationally, be it hospitality, be it private, be it, going to a gym. But environmental wellness, like I keep mentioning, has become a fashionable thing. So whether it's hashtagged all over the world and whether it's on Facebook, doesn't matter. People are talking about it. So I think the awareness is incredibly important. So what I find very frustrating today is what we're calling now green wash or green wellness wash or environmental wash, is that people don't know what they can do. Yes, take a shorter shower. Yes, buy recycled clothing, don't buy new clothing. Buy an electric car, but that electric car is still being made in a factory that's still emitting a lot of CO2 emissions. I need to get from point A to point B, but flying is one of the biggest polluters. So, again, difficult question to answer, but what can people do besides planting trees? That's an easy one.
Very well. You touch on one thing that is, of course, very important. I mean, I always think, and with my background, it may be logical, but nature can help us in so many ways. And in fact, I think, it's interesting. Wellness is not a concept that I'm very familiar with, but of course, sustainability, which is all about the interface of basically people, economy, and nature, and how we can live in harmony with nature, is, in my mind, what wellness is about as well. So in fact, the whole issue of, as you say, planting trees, being with nature, restoring nature where we can, and not destroying nature, which is maybe the most important part, is certainly going to help us with any of our sustainability discussions. It is not going to stop the CO2 going into the air. As you say, there is so much going on in our world these days that depends on energy, and energy at the moment is still mainly supplied through fossil fuel sources. But, there are these discussions going on. Of course, solar energy is an obvious one. And certainly for a country like Malta, where I live, and I guess even for southern Vietnam, that is a very, very obvious source of energy. the whole question of wind energy, which has not really been exploited as far as it could be, is an issue. But I think also countries like Vietnam and here in Malta should be thinking about energy in the sea that is totally not been looked at, which is an enormous, powerful force. And if you could harness somehow the energy from the waves, the energy from underwater currents, there are sources of energy that could presumably compete very well with oil and gas. I guess the biggest frustration is that we need to get the big industry, the oil and gas industry, turned around into really seriously looking at these alternatives. And I think there, you know, whilst the talk is there and you have used the word greenwash, in reality, not enough money is really invested in looking at these alternatives because, you know, it's a status quo and people basically feel comfortable with what they are, people with the investment for these companies. So it's a question of, I guess, trying to change some of these very key players. A lot of that has to do with political will as well. And I think really, I always say to people, if you don't like what is happening, if you are in a country with elections, vote and make sure that things change. If you are in countries with different systems of governance, there may be other ways that you can influence government. But really, the government has to force the companies to change, the consumer forces the companies to change, and I think in the long run things will change. The question is, how much time have we got? And that is really the problem. Things are happening. I mean, I see a lot of exciting things. Even, you know, you mentioned air travel, which is of course the big elephant in the room, but there are discussions, there are changes, there is research going on. I just don't think it's fast enough and it's not far enough.
Yeah. I mean, it's complicated, and like you said, when governments are involved, when we watch co-op talks and things like that with everyone involved, there's other interests, and unfortunately, human nature is we're okay until we're injured, we're okay until we can't breathe, we're okay until it's raining acid. So yeah, it's not our problem, you know. Oh yes, it's flooding in Sri Lanka. It's not going to happen here. Then it's only happened in the middle of Germany. Oh wow. So like you said, but I mean, again, I'm optimistic, and my wife always says I'm overly optimistic and naive, but I feel that there is a growth in change and people do understand. But yes, it takes a lot more than just a couple of us, you know, making some noise and not going to school and standing outside with our sign. But there's been a lot of noise made, and it definitely goes in the right direction. Maybe I can ask you something else, your opinion. Carbon offset. So I had a very interesting talk with a company from Norway. Scandinavia, always high on the list when it comes to sustainability. What are your views on these companies that are calculating offset percentages and values to pay off other projects like planting trees or cultivating? I think that's quite an interesting move.
No, totally agree with you. And I felt, you know, offsets is a concept that really is not that new. I mean, we've talked about biodiversity offsets many, many years ago already. The idea really is it should be a last resort. You know, the main thing is, can you reduce? I mean, if we talk about carbon and energy, can you reduce your energy consumption through means of, I don't know, better conservation, you know, stop leakage, those kind of things. Change some of your appliances to be appliances that are more efficient, more effective. But at the end of the day, there will most likely be some emissions that you have no control over. I mean, we talked earlier about the airlines. I mean, you can't do anything as an individual person about what the airlines do. In fact, what is called scope 2 emissions are the emissions that come with the electricity supply. In some countries, there is no choice. You know, you have one supplier, the government, and what they do, you can't control. There are countries where you can choose and you can actually change to a supplier that maybe has a greener source of energy. But those emissions that you cannot actually deal with, you can therefore offset. And basically the idea is that, you know, somewhere else, the CO2 is absorbed in a way that offsets what you're doing. Now, the absorption can be many, many ways. As I said earlier, of course, planting trees is one thing, planting any vegetation. And there are technological fixes, interesting ones, as you say. I mean, I'm not sure which company in Norway you were talking about. I know in Iceland, they're talking about putting it back in the ground. there are discussions here in the UK as well, whether the old oil fields can be used to actually store the CO2. In Australia, they're making bricks from CO2. So there are ways and means that you can do it. I think the concern I would have is that people jump on the offset train without thinking about the reducing. And that should not be the case. You know, it should not be a question of, look, I can pay for offset, so I don't actually have to think about what I'm doing. It should really be that last resort where you try and do as much as you can yourself, and what you cannot deal with, that's where you think about offsets.
Yes, yes. I mean, it's a good for a bad, and it's better than nothing. And
True.
If you fly in a plane from Asia to Europe and then go and plant $200 worth of trees because that's the offset calculated by your carbon emission, it's better than not planting the trees at all, right? And it
very true indeed. Yeah. But I think again, you know, the question is the whole greenwashing. I mean, it's easy to buy a credit somewhere and be told by the company, we are planting trees somewhere in Chile or somewhere in Vietnam. You have no idea. So really, you know, it's a question of credibility as well. In fact, one thing that I quite like, Hilton, and I've talked about that with one or two of the companies that are that we're working with in this registry of climate-friendly travel, where they say, look, the offset should be near where we are. I.e., if you're planting trees, it should be in your village, in your community, in your province. So it actually makes sense that you are improving the quality of life where you are, and therefore the impact is immediately compensated with something local. And that to me makes sense.
No, I agree with you. The fact of knowing that I'm helping to set up a windmill in Sri Lanka makes me feel good, but I'm not actually sure if that windmill's going to happen.
Right.
Yeah.
But if it's a windmill in Hue, you do know because you can see
I'll
it.
be watching it. Correct.
Exactly.
Correct.
Yes.
Exactly. Something that we've been working on one or two of the other think tanks is the 3 Ps, which you mentioned earlier, people, planet, and profit. Mm-hmm. So something that we're trying to implement within the hospitality industry, quite interestingly, is that within a P&L, within a business model, people should consider people, planet, and then profit. And when setting up a budget, for the business, the annual year, the following year, there should be a percentage of people activities, which could be, you know, like you said, community. And then there's a percentage in there that is calculated towards planet, doing something sustainable. And there at the bottom afterwards, once you've taken out that percentage, is your profit. But what happens today, and you and I both know this, and everybody who's listening, is we have our top revenue, and we have our expenses, our fixed expenses. And then if we have a profit, we will use some of that to do some projects. Yeah. So the idea of the triple P, or the triple bottom line, is to really try and integrate that into the business plan before the bottom line. So this is something we're looking at, and that can definitely help as well. Again, so it's an interesting concept. So
yes, and I totally agree.
Yeah, I'm sure the two of us could go on for hours about different initiatives and things like that. So I'd like to know a little bit more about your bamboo background, because you're very involved in that, and your education, and you're talking, and you're going off to Sicily this evening or this afternoon for a conference. Maybe you can fill us in a little bit about your bamboo philosophy or know-how, or please.
True. Well, this was very interesting. As I was the Director General of this organization in Beijing. And basically, I discovered that in China, they have an annual revenue, an annual income from bamboo activities that is worth $60 billion a year. And this is because they make all kinds of things from bamboo that I never thought of in the past. In fact, you know, bamboo in China is being part of I would say, part of life for centuries, if not for eons. But they basically use bamboo for furniture. They use bamboo for flooring, for, you know, construction. They use bamboo for clothing and fiber and paper and cardboard and that sort of stuff. So there's the whole paper industry. But I guess most exciting is the more recent developments. On the one hand, the whole question about furniture and what is called engineered bamboo. So effectively, you split the bamboo pole into slats, which you glue back together, and you then have a plank or a beam from which you can make all kinds of things that you can't really make from a round bamboo pole. So fascinating things like, the floors in containers. If you think about it, millions of containers around the world, they all have a floor that normally used to be made from wood. Trees were cut to make a wooden floor. After one trip, it would be thrown away. It's now made from bamboo. And bamboo, there are 1,600 different species of bamboo, incidentally, but they're all grass, basically. So you're talking making planks, making flooring from grass. And that's quite an interesting concept because, people don't really think about that. It looks like a tree, but it is actually a grass. And the good thing therefore is if you cut it, it grows back. Just like your lawn, if you mow the lawn, it comes back because it's the best way of actually keeping your lawn healthy. So it's the same with bamboo. You can harvest bamboo, it will grow back naturally. You can harvest it again every year, again and again and again. True sustainability for that. The good thing also is that bamboo grows in fairly poor soils, so it doesn't compete with food crops. In fact, very often it's used as a shade tree for food crops or as a windbreak, so you can intercrop it with food crops as well. And it's just an amazing plant that can help with all kinds of things. Of course, in the sort of modern discussions about climate change again, it's also a very interesting carbon sink, because as it grows so fast and as you can harvest it and it then generates new shoots, they actually absorb greenhouse gases very fast, faster than many trees. If you make durable goods out of the bamboo, a table, a wall, a plank, the carbon is locked in. So in fact, it's a very efficient carbon sink, natural carbon sink. And as a result, talking again about the profit, now that carbon credits are going to be traded and are actually becoming as means of financial gain, people are interested to plant simply so they can get the money for the carbon credits. Again, I would not see that as a reason to plant, but it's a very nice added benefit.
Wow.
Now, I was in China, but as I said earlier, we had members around the world. Vietnam is one. There is about 50 million hectares of bamboo around the world. And people don't realize that because everybody thinks bamboo is just Japan and China. But there is bamboo in Southeast Asia. There's a bamboo in India. There's bamboo in Africa. The whole of the sub-Saharan belt north of the Kalahari has bamboo. It doesn't really use it. Africa doesn't have a history of using bamboo. So we talked with a lot of agricultural ministers and companies that are starting to think about how it can be used there. And there's bamboo in Latin America. The whole of South America has different species of bamboo. So it's a plant that is actually, I say, it's not one plant, it's 1,600 different species of a plant that grows around the world. And more we're trying to link people together to say, look, you can make things from bamboo that you may not have realized, and it's a real opportunity for small-scale economic development.
I asked a question, I got an answer. Wow. We would definitely see bamboo in a different light. Wow, that is incredibly interesting.
No,
Wow.
It is. And I say what is fascinating at the moment, now that I'm back in Europe, Europe has no natural bamboo. It's one of the continents where there isn't any. But Europe is a market for bamboo products. It's actually where most of the bamboo products go to because people like to buy bamboo things. So there are now discussions here in Europe, again, partially a result of climate change because people realize that some of the natural vegetation is dying out. Beetles are arriving that weren't there in the past that are actually attacking some of our softwood plantations. And the discussions are taking place now to look for alternatives. At the same time, the agricultural system is also looking for alternatives. So bamboo is all of a sudden an opportunity for economic agricultural development. I would have my concerns about using bamboo for natural regeneration in Europe. It's not a natural plant, so you import a non-native plant into a natural system. That is not what I would totally support. but to use it as a crop, as an agricultural crop for, I say, economic development, agricultural development, job creation, and the benefit of the carbon sequestration, I don't see any problems with that.
Wow.
So that's what we are at the moment doing in Southern Europe, and what we will be talking about in the UK next week.
Fantastic. Super interesting. I would definitely follow your posts. If
You will
anyone's
read about it.
Dr. Hans has some incredibly interesting posts on LinkedIn, so feel free to join and follow on. I also tend to share some of them as well. Maybe the last question I can ask you is, can you give us a little bit more information on this project you're involved in with the government of Malta? In fact, pretty much how we met. With the travel sustainability that you were mentioning. Can you maybe give us a little bit of insight, so maybe people can join up and get a little bit more involved as well?
Well, it would be fantastic. Basically, you know, it's an initiative that actually started in Belgium with a good friend, a colleague of mine, Professor Jeffrey Lipman. And that came out of a discussion, out of a partnership he had with Maurice Strong, who is really the father of sustainable development. He created the whole concept of sustainable development. He was the first director of the United Nations Environment Program. He was behind the discussions of the Millennium Development Goals. Anyway, we set up this system that is called climate-friendly travel. And basically it is looking at how we can work with the tourism industry to promote tourism that's good for the environment, to put it simply, that fits with the SDGs, that doesn't create additional burden for climate, and therefore is tourism that we can totally support. Now, we're doing that through a number of ways. I mean, on the one hand, we are training young people. We have a training program with Malta. This is the Institute of Tourism Studies that has actually got a diploma course. So we're building a cadre of young activists, is maybe the right word, although these are people working in the tourism industry, very often people that actually already have a job, to get them more au fait with sustainability issues, with climate change issues, and how that interfaces with the tourism industry. But we're also set up a registry, what we call, which is basically a platform where companies that are serious about climate change and sustainability can lodge their plans, their ambitions, their thoughts, what they want to do. And we help those companies with as much information as we can find. We've built a research platform where we are curating information from the web. I mean, we always say, look, you can go to Google and find it. I mean, there is so much information about, you know, carbon calculators, about discussions on climate change, about what to do and what not to do. But it's actually too much for a manager of a hotel to get his or her head around. What we're trying to do is to say, look, these are the 10 most likely ones. These are some of the documents that can really help you. But at the end of the day, you have to decide what you want to do. It's not my job, and it's not the job of this organization I work for to tell you, you must go this way, you must go that way. All we're trying to do is to say, if you're serious about sustainability and about climate change, join us. We'll try and help you. We'll try and put you in touch with the information. We can put you in touch with some of our partners. We have partnership agreements with companies. In some cases, that will become a commercial interaction. Up to you. We don't actually benefit from that. The great thing is, and that's the Malta link, Malta saw a couple of years ago that this would be a really good thing to support. And they've basically provided us with the resources for the small organization to function. So at this moment in time, we're not looking for membership fees. We're not looking for charges to pay for what we're doing. We're in the amazing situation that we can say, we're here to help you. And Malta is providing the resources for us to be able to do that.
Well, government should be doing that. You see?
Fantastic. No, a really foresighted view of a small island. I mean, Malta has just developed its tourism strategy. And if you look at their 2030 plans, sustainability and wellness is in there.
And we're seeing it all over the world. How can people get more information about this?
Websites is the easiest one. I guess the simplest thing is to look for the Sun program. It's called sunxprogram.com,
I will share it.
which if you can share that. From there, they can find all the right information. If they want to register, it's climatefriendly.travel.
Yes, it's all there. Okay, definitely. So
And really,
yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying, in this day and age, it's all online. It's all basically automatic. But of course, we are here to answer questions. If people say, sounds interesting, but I don't really believe it, or I don't see it, or I don't understand what it's trying to do, happy to talk.
Fantastic. And that's how we met. So
Indeed. And I'm very glad you joined, and through you, some others joined.
Wow.
I think, again, we are building a community. And going back to one of your earlier questions, what can we all do? That's part of the thing, isn't it? We work together and we learn from each other. There are some interesting examples of what people have done. It may be small steps, but many small steps will get us further.
I think that's a fantastic way to sum it up. They may be small steps, but all these small steps count. And if we all come together and look at different ways that we can improve the environment, improve our global carbon footprint, improve whatever it might be, we can definitely make changes together. So again, a world of information, a mind of mass experience. Dr. Hans, thank you very much for your insight and your comments on I know a passion, not only just what you do, but I know you live it, breathe it, and so it comes through when you speak. It's easy to listen because it's a passion. So again, vielen danken, danke wel, grazie mille, thank you very much. I think, and I can say, of course, come on, in Vietnamese, which you speak as well a little bit. Thank you very much for your insight, your information, and I will post this with some of your details so people can contact you, or obviously go on to SunX and find out more information, how they can also come.
Well, thank you very much, Hilda. It's been a pleasure, and very nice talking to you, and thank you very much for giving the opportunity to explain what it's all about.
No, we thank you. Thank you very much.